You spend your whole life chasing the first $10,000, and the moment you finally touch it, something strange happens. You start hearing about $20,000 and it feels smaller, almost unimpressive, like, oh, that's just double the first number, right? Same rules apply, just more zeros. Wrong. Dead wrong. Because $20,000 doesn't play by the same rules as $10,000. It rewires something completely different in your brain, and almost nobody talks about it because it's not as flashy as your first 10 grand. My name is Cap, and I spend way too much time thinking about the exact moments money changes how your brain works. Hit subscribe because by the end of this video, I'm going to show you the specific decision that becomes available to you at $20,000 that literally does not exist at $10,000. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now, before we get into what actually shifts, let's talk about why people assume nothing new happens here. The common belief is that milestones scale linearly. 10 grand buys you peace of mind, so 20 grand just buys you more peace of mind. Same feeling, bigger cushion. That's the trap, because money milestones aren't a ruler, they're a staircase, and each step unlocks a different room, not just a longer hallway. Here's the room $10,000 unlocks. It gets you out of survival mode. It absorbs the flat tire, the ER copay, the month you got laid off. That's defense. $10,000 is a shield. It stops bad things from becoming catastrophic. But here's the thing about shields. They don't win the fight, they just keep you standing in it. $20,000 is where the fight starts changing shape, because now, for the first time, you're not just covered, you're capitalized. And capitalized means you can actually deploy money instead of just holding it in reserve. That's the difference nobody explains. At 10 grand, every dollar is on standby duty, waiting for disaster. At 20 grand, you can send half your army out on offense while the other half still guards the base. Let's make this concrete. Say Maya has $20,000 saved. Her emergency fund, the real don't touch this number for her expenses, is about $9,000. That leaves $11,000 that isn't emergency money anymore. It's what I call idle capital. And idle capital is the most psychologically underrated resource a person can have, because now Maya can look at a $4,000 certification that would bump her salary by $8,000 a year, and instead of that being a fantasy, it's a decision. She can look at maxing out a Roth IRA for the first time in her life, not as a hypothetical, but as a line item. She can consider a beat-up rental property down payment in a cheap market, not because she's rich, but because she finally has money that isn't spoken for. That $11,000 of breathing room is doing something $10,000 never could. It's letting her ask, what should this money become? Instead of, please don't let me need this money. And this is where the data actually backs up what sounds like a vibe. Researchers studying financial well-being have consistently found that the jump from having some savings to having a full 3 to 6 month cushion is where risk tolerance changes measurably. People become significantly more willing to negotiate salary, change jobs, or start a side business. And for most working Americans, a real 3 to 6 month expense cushion doesn't land at 10 grand. It lands much closer to 20. So in a very real sense, $10,000 gets you out of the hole, and $20,000 is where you actually reach the surface. But I promised you the objection would come, so let's hear it. Cap, isn't this just semantics? More money is more money, why does the number matter? Fair question. Here's the math that answers it. At $10,000, if you had a genuine crisis, job loss, major repair, a medical bill, that number could get wiped out in a single bad month. It's fragile. One event, and you're back to zero, back to square one, back to the 2 a.m. spreadsheet math. At $20,000, the same disaster doesn't erase you. It dents you. You absorb the hit and you're still standing on solid ground with money left over. That's not a semantic difference. That's the difference between a wall that survives one hit and a wall that survives 3. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting and slightly uncomfortable, because this is the part nobody puts in a headline. At $20,000, a second psychological shift happens that catches most people off guard. Boredom. Seriously. Somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000, a lot of people report feeling almost anticlimactic. The dopamine hit of watching the number grow slows down. 10 grand felt like an event. 20 grand just feels like Tuesday. And this is actually the most dangerous point in the entire savings journey, because boredom is exactly when people make impulsive moves. A car upgrade, a vacation, because I deserve it. A sure thing investment, a coworker mentioned. The excitement fades. The discipline hasn't fully hardened into identity yet, and that gap is where $20,000 accounts quietly become $12,000 accounts again. The people who push through that boredom are the ones who understand something the impatient ones don't. $20,000 isn't the destination, it's the launchpad. It's the number where compound growth actually starts contributing meaningfully alongside your own contributions. Run it out, $20,000, growing at a historical market average, sitting untouched for 20 years, becomes something in the ballpark of six figures without you adding another dollar. At $10,000, that same math gets you roughly half. The gap isn't twice as good. It compounds into something closer to 3 or 4 times the outcome because growth builds on growth, and 20 grand simply has more surface area for that to happen on. There's also a social layer to this that's worth naming honestly. At $10,000, most people keep quiet about their savings because it still feels fragile, almost embarrassing to mention. At $20,000, something shifts in how people talk about money in conversation, not bragging, just steadier, less defensive. You stop flinching when a friend mentions their 401k. You stop changing the subject when someone brings up retirement. That's not vanity. That's the early signal of an identity shift from someone managing scarcity to someone managing a foundation. Let's be fair to the skeptics for a second, though, because I don't want to oversell this. $20,000 will not make you rich. It will not let you quit your job. If your expenses are genuinely unstable, inconsistent income, a lot of dependents, no employer benefits, that number might still only cover 4 months instead of 6, and that's a real constraint, not a personal failure. And if you're carrying high-interest debt, credit cards at 20+%, some of that idle capital conversation doesn't apply to you yet because paying down that debt is functionally a better return than almost any investment available. So no, 20 grand isn't a magic threshold for everyone equally, but for the person who's debt-free or close to it, sitting on that number does something structurally different than sitting on half of it. So here's what I actually want you to take from this. If you're sitting somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 right now, feeling like the excitement wore off, like the progress feels slower and less meaningful than when you crossed your first big milestone, that's not a sign you're doing something wrong. That's the exact point where most people quietly step off the path, right before the part where the math starts doing real work for them instead of just protecting them. The boring middle isn't a detour, it's the whole game.